So today, we're diving into the origin story of one of the most influential collections of texts in human history. We're talking about a work that has literally shaped civilizations. But its beginnings, well, they're way more complex and, honestly, way more fascinating than you might think.
To get us started, I've got a little riddle for you. How is a library, with all its different books, authors, and time periods, how is that like a single book?
The answer? It isn't. Not at all. And understanding that one simple fact is the key to this whole story. You see, this idea that the Bible is just one single book is probably one of the biggest misconceptions out there. And the funny thing is, the truth has been hiding in plain sight this whole time, right in its name.
Yeah, the word Bible itself kind of gives the game away. It comes from the Greek phrase ta biblia, which literally means the books, plural. And you can trace that name all the way back to the ancient Phoenician port city of Byblos, which was a huge exporter of papyrus, basically the paper of the ancient world. So right from the jump, this thing was known as a collection of books.
Now, for hundreds of years, this collection of books was treated like one unified story. But then, the 1800s happened, and a series of incredible archaeological discoveries started to pull back the curtain on a history that was so much deeper and way more connected to other cultures than anybody had ever realized. So just imagine this for a second. You go out digging in the desert, and you're totally convinced you're going to find hard evidence that proves the stories you've always believed are historical fact. But what happens when the proof you find actually tells a totally different story? That's exactly what was going on in the mid-1800s. You had thinkers like Charles Darwin and Friedrich Nietzsche challenging traditional faith. So, in response, a bunch of Western archaeologists headed to the Middle East with a very clear goal: find stuff that proves the biblical accounts are unique and historically spot on.
But what they found instead was, well, it was staggering. They dug up these ancient tablets with the law code of a Babylonian king named Hammurabi. And when they translated it, they realized it was written centuries before the time of Moses. Now, this didn't make the Mosaic Law invalid, but it totally shattered the idea that it was the first great legal code in history.
And it didn't stop there. Discoveries just kept coming. They found these much older Mesopotamian stories that sounded incredibly familiar. There was a great flood story in the Epic of Gilgamesh, different creation myths, even a story about the fall of man, and they all predated the accounts in Genesis. They went looking for proof of uniqueness, and instead, they found its deep ancient family tree.
Now, let's be clear. This didn't mean the Bible was fake or wrong. No, it pointed to something way more profound. This wasn't some book that just dropped out of the sky. It was a library, carefully and thoughtfully assembled over 1,000 years, woven from the rich cultural tapestry of the ancient world.
In Judaism, this library has a name, the Tanakh. It's a collection of 24 distinct books. Later on, Christianity would adopt these same texts, kind of shuffle them around, and call them the Old Testament. But to really get a feel for their origin, you gotta look at the original Hebrew structure. And that structure is broken into three main sections. First up, you've got the Torah, which means the teachings. These are the 5 books of Moses, the core laws and origin stories. You could call it the foundation. Then comes the Nevi'im, the books of the prophets, which really act as the nation's conscience. And finally, you have the Ketuvim, or the writings, this amazing mix of poetry, history, and philosophy. It's the soul of the library.
Okay, so that leads to a really big question, right? If some of the stories have roots in older cultures, where did the powerful and unique moral vision of the Hebrew Bible actually come from? Well, the answer wasn't found in some quiet monastery. It was forged in the fire of national disaster. 2 events, 2 absolute catastrophes, completely shaped Israelite identity. First, in 722 BCE, the Assyrian Empire rolls in and conquers the northern kingdom, scattering its people. Then, just over a century later, in 587 BCE, the Babylonians do the unthinkable. They march on Jerusalem, destroy Solomon's temple, the very center of the Jewish universe, and drag the leaders into exile. So, faced with total annihilation, the Israelite prophets had to answer a terrifying question. Why? Why is this happening to us? And their answer was frankly radical. They said it wasn't because their God was weak, but because he was so powerful and just that he was punishing his own people for failing to follow the law. But, and this is so important, it wasn't just about punishment. They also offered a powerful message of hope. If the people returned to righteousness, they could be redeemed. It was right there, in the middle of all that suffering, that the ethical core of the Tanakh was really forged. I mean, think about it.
After you've been conquered and exiled, the demand for justice for the vulnerable, the widow, the orphan, the immigrant, that's not just some abstract idea. It's born from your own experience of being powerless. Humility isn't just a nice virtue. It's a survival lesson you learn when you've been crushed by empires. And obedience to a divine, moral law becomes the only path back to survival and restoration. So, we've got stories influenced by older cultures and a moral code shaped by crisis. But how did all these different scrolls, all these oral traditions, get pulled together into the single authoritative scripture we have today? Well, it was a long, slow process. We're talking nearly 1,000 years. The earliest writing probably started way back in the 10th century BCE. But the real catalyst, the real push, was that Babylonian exile in 587 BCE. That trauma spurred scribes and priests to gather, edit, and preserve all their sacred texts. By about the 3rd century BCE, the collection was mostly set. And by the 1st century CE, the list of books was pretty much fixed. For centuries, the oldest actual manuscripts we had of the Hebrew Bible were from the Middle Ages. The physical link to that ancient world was just gone. And then 1947 happened. In 1947, a young shepherd just stumbled into a cave and found these old clay jars, and inside, the Dead Sea Scrolls. This was a total game changer. These scrolls were 1,000 years older than any other Hebrew manuscripts of the Bible ever found. It gave us this incredible, unprecedented snapshot of the texts from the time of the Second Temple. And those scrolls really confirmed the whole story. It's a story of evolution. It brings everything into focus. The Hebrew Bible, the Tanakh, it's not one book. It's a library. A library whose stories echo the myths of ancient Mesopotamia and whose incredible moral vision was forged in the fires of national disaster and an undying hope for a better future. So what we're really looking at here is a conversation that lasted for 1,000 years between generations of people trying to figure out the big stuff, meaning, morality, and our place in the universe. And that kind of leaves us with one final question to chew on. How does knowing this history, knowing that this sacred library was collected and edited and preserved by human hands responding to the crises of their own time, how does that change what it all means for us, right here, right now?